Hello and welcome to The Law According to. I'm Mike Minnis of 2M Legal, and for this episode, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Tom Oliver from Glanvilles. Tom dives deep into his legal journey and provides valuable insights for anyone looking to advance in the legal profession. This is The Law According to Tom Oliver. Hello and welcome to The Law According to. My name is Mike Minnis of 2M Legal, and today my guest is Tom Oliver, partner associate at Glanvilles. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mike. Cheers.
So, Tom, this is all about your career story. So let's go right in at the beginning. What is it that first attracted you towards the world of law?
I like to think that I sort of had a choice in it growing up, but I came from a very legal family, so I've never really known anything different. My dad's also a solicitor in this very similar area of law. My mum was a magistrate for, I think, a couple of decades, actually. So I was always within a legal household and hearing bits and bobs about how the process works and the difficulties sometimes, but also the highs as well as that. And I guess I kind of grew a fascination from that. And I've always been interested in law type things on telly. I like a whodunit murder mystery type program. I liked watching The Bill when I was a kid. I used to watch that when my friends were watching other slightly more cool things on telly. I was watching The Bill, and I've just always found it interesting. And I suppose it's probably a bit cliched that you do law to do good and to try and help, particularly when you're in litigation, which I am. And it is a real cliche, and you're not always doing good. Sometimes you're just doing the job. But I do like the idea of sometimes you have a client who's a bit more of an underdog, and you have to sometimes take on Goliath and try and win.
So it's kind of almost a calling for you due to the fact is, if you like, the family business in many ways that you've followed into. Was there any other kind of potential careers for you, or was it always kind of going to be the legal route?
I mean, I was always a big fan of drama at school, so theatre studies type thing. I think a lot of my friends wanted to be footballers. I wanted to be an actor. And for whatever reason, that maybe I didn't have the talent, but that didn't really get off the ground. So I thought, what profession could I possibly use the performance in or get some thrill from performance? And I suppose finding law and litigation where I go to court or I have mediations and I am kind of doing that performance aspect of it, I was able to get a bit of a thrill from that. I mean, I've always been a sports fan, so I suppose there was always an element of wanting to be a rugby player and stuff like that. But I don't remember a time when I didn't want to be working in the law.
Right. And I guess nowadays you want to try and keep the drama to a minimum, really, within your profession.
Well, I suppose the drama, yes, but the performance side of it, I do still enjoy. I do still enjoy going to court and hearing the sound of my own voice, basically.
Fair enough. So I suppose looking at it, if both your parents were in the legal profession, one would maybe assume that there weren't particularly that many challenges for you entering into the career, because you would have had mentors directly available to you. But did you have many challenges, and if so, what were they?
I certainly think I was able to call on them for advice whenever, and even to this day. I mean, my dad has had a very successful legal career, and in my career, I would say a lot of my successes have been down to the advice or the steering that he would give me. Often when you're quite young and a bit inexperienced and wet behind the ears, you don't make necessarily the right decisions in the early parts of your career, but having him there as a sounding board, if I was possibly about to make a stupid decision or something like that, has been very helpful. So I'm very aware of having two parents who have quite a sound grounding, certainly in the legal profession, to help me. That being said, there was probably a slight flip side to it in that I'm not that similar in terms of style of being a lawyer as my dad. I think growing up, I still work in a similar geographical location to him, whilst obviously not the same firm. there were some people that thought I was him, or I was just going to be a chip off the old block, and I'm not. I'm very, very different. Not to say he's right and I'm wrong, or vice versa, but we're just different in style. So I think
different styles,
I think there was a bit of stigma attached with that. I didn't stay at my first firm that long, and I guess I wouldn't necessarily say that was a challenge, but it wasn't somewhere where I felt like I saw my future, and I realised that relatively quickly. So I suppose it was a challenge. When you join your first firm, you think, right, I'm going to be here for the foreseeable, but then quite quickly it became apparent I didn't want to be. So I needed to make a jump relatively quickly. So I suppose that was not the easiest thing to have to deal with early in my career, but really challenges sort of started really when I started the job, and you had to deal with difficult clients and sometimes, I suppose, bad results when actually there's not a lot you could have done about it. That's sometimes quite a galling thing to have to deal with. And maybe in the earlier parts of my career, I would take that a bit too personally, or I would struggle too much with when you do get a bad result, because no lawyer wins every case. It's just not possible. And sometimes you go into court thinking, well, this is a slam dunk, and everyone around you says it's a slam dunk, and you come out having lost. But then I suppose the flip side of that is you can sometimes go into court thinking this is a stinking case, I'm going to lose this, all ends up, and you come out having won. So it is challenging in that respect, in that you have to sort of dust yourself off and be back on it the next day, so that the next client isn't getting a bad version of you because you're upset or bothered by the fact that you had a bad day the day before. So there are challenges in being a lawyer, and I often found through the early stages again that the bad reputation that lawyers get, it isn't a great thing. I think a lot of people think we're just money grabbing mercenaries, which is, I wouldn't say true really, but I would say that, wouldn't I? But I don't think it's completely true across the board, and sometimes you have to fight that stigma, but it's just part and parcel of it, I suppose.
It's difficult, isn't it? Likewise in recruitment has a bit of a reputation, and unfortunately you have to fight against that reputation and prove people wrong, which I imagine is similar in law. I suppose the difference with law is that it's very much glamorized on television, isn't it? You see these, LA Law and Ali Bill and all those sort of things. I've shown my age there by kind of referencing to from the 90s, wouldn't I?
Just say Suits, seem a lot younger.
Suits, yeah, absolutely. That would have been a better one to reference, wouldn't it? And people think, well, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Wearing sharp suits, driving nice cars, and things like that. But it's there's a lot more gritty side to law, and that's the part that people don't really see, is it? The hours of looking through cases and things like that.
Well, exactly. I mean, even doing litigation, people think it's just court and flash cars and flash suits, and actually it is paperwork, really. It's paperwork, phone calls and stuff like that. It's not actually as glamorous as it would look on Suits, and that possibly does make life more difficult when people expect you to just be able to be in court the next day. But yeah, I totally get what you mean.
Yeah. And so when you're saying about the early days when you take it very personally and get quite upset, how long did it take you to get past that sort of stage? I imagine it probably still happens every now and then now, because it's one of those things, isn't it, whereby no matter how many times you've had a case where you thought you're going to win, that you're disappointed with it at the outcome or whatever it is. But I imagine that probably happened much more often earlier, and that's probably one of the challenges that people new to law have, isn't it? That they think they've gone through academia, they've done their training contract, they're now that's it, they're now released to the world, as it were, and now it's the harsh realities of actually sometimes it doesn't always go the way you think it's going to go. So how do you feel? A, how did you deal with it at the time? But B, how long did it take for you to kind of get to a stage where you're kind of like almost like, well, actually, I appreciate that wasn't right, but I can kind of live with it because I've done all I can.
Well, you're right. I still, even now as a 7-8-year qualified solicitor, there are still certain files and certain matters or certain results that will definitely get me down. It took a realization. When I was a trainee, I worked in personal injury quite a lot, and quite high value personal injury, and with that comes often, sadly, worse injuries as a result. And I would find, as a trainee, so I was very junior, didn't really know what I was doing, I would find sometimes the injuries or what had happened as part of the case, I would find very distressing. I find it really difficult at 5, 6 o'clock going home and not thinking about that young lad who had a football career ahead of him and then got a brain injury and now he can't even talk. I found it really difficult to sort of deal with that and not be affected by it. But I think possibly having that very early in my legal career helped, because I was able to talk to the people that I would work for and say, I don't really know how you do this, and still get to sleep and still come in the next day invigorated and ready for it. And someone who I did actually train with said to me, I can get upset about it because I know it's upsetting and it is something that would bother me. But I know that if I'm upset or if I'm sad about what's happened to this person, then I know that I won't be doing 100% for them. And that's what they need me for. They don't need me for sympathy. They're getting that around them everywhere, from family members, friends, whatever. They don't need a sympathetic lawyer. They need a lawyer who's going to actually be the exact opposite, completely remove the emotion and just do the best they can for me. And it still probably took me a few years to really understand that advice and be able to implement it. But he was absolutely spot on. You often find that clients will look for you to be almost sort of a psychiatrist for them and a sounding board. And actually, that's not why they pay us. That's not what they need us for. They might want it at the time, but that's not actually what they need. They need us to completely remove emotion and just act to the best of our ability and do the best we can in given those set circumstances. But as I said a moment ago, still now there are certain files that bother me more than they should, and I will take it home with me, and it will take a few hours of playing football or watching telly or cooking or something like that for me to really decompress and think, right, I can deal with that now and process it and go in tomorrow morning and not be bothered. But it's not easy at all.
Yeah, kind of clearing your mind and getting almost refreshing your mindset, isn't it? It's
and everyone needs something that they can do that is their decompression. And I think I didn't really value that. I didn't see a huge amount of point in it, but it is really important that you can separate work from home, because again, if you're not relaxing when you should be relaxing, you're not going to be at your best when you should be at your best. And if you can understand that process, then I guess it makes you a better lawyer.
Yeah, absolutely. And so obviously everything has challenges, but one of the reasons why we continue doing the things that we do is because we enjoy the successes. So I appreciate you can't go into too much detail, but tell us about some of the successes you're particularly proud of.
I'd love to be able to go into some of the details of some of the really good ones, but I mean, I see one of my successes outside of the obvious of winning cases and being lucky enough to be in a firm where I'm happy and get promotions and be additional responsibility and people see the good I'm doing and get rewarded for that. Outside of that, I think a success is being able to do the same thing every day to a similar standard. And as we were speaking about a minute ago, not have vast periods of time, days or weeks, when I'm not able to compete. Essentially, I'm not able to do my job because it's got me down too much. So I think really, I would say my biggest success is evolving to the point where I am now. And I'm not saying for a second I'm perfect at all, but evolving to the point now where I feel like I'm able to do my job to the best of my ability every day, no matter what gets thrown at me. Again, I'll caveat that with things happen that upset you, and I'm not saying that I'm not human, but using experience of working in several different firms, which I see as a negative in some respects, but in a positive as other respects. I've worked with a lot of people and seen a lot of good things that I've been able to, I think and hope, incorporate into how I do it. I've obviously got big cases, as I said, which I see as successful, and I've been lucky enough to be in legal press and bits and bobs like that for certain cases, which has interestingly meant I've got a lot more of that work, which is obviously exactly why we do it, and it's really good PR. But yeah, I'd love to be able to go into some of the cases. Maybe I can when we're not recording.
Okay. And so you've kind of covered this to a degree, but if you had to sum it up, what is it you particularly love about working in the law? What is it that drives you every day and makes you think, yeah, this is right for me?
When I was younger, I used to think it was money. I used to think lawyers earn loads of money. That's the reason I want to do it. But I think you quickly realize when you become an adult actually that money doesn't actually mean a huge amount when you've got to a certain level. It's about whether you can get up every day and do the job. I very much like the thrill and the adrenaline rush of getting a good new case or going to court or having a mediation, and the boost you get, the adrenaline rush when I'm driving to court or walking up the steps. That's why I do it, and I really, really enjoy that. But I suppose being in litigation and doing quite a wide-ranging litigation, because I'm not specified in one particular area, I find I quite like the problem-solving aspect of it. It's almost like, I suppose, detective work, but you're not a detective. And I'm going back to all those detective shows that I used to like watching when I was a kid. I like the idea that you might not be looking at a murder or a crime or something, but you are still sometimes trying to piece things together and work out what's actually gone on and how best you're going to frame something and put something forward to a judge often, or to the other side, a client, mediator, whatever. And that's quite an uplifting process and something I find very enjoyable. And I suppose, again, it's another cliche, but when you do get a good result, seeing the look on the client's face when you've been the one to help them, or you've been part of the team to help them get that result, which ultimately the next day I'm on to the next file, but that's something that's massive for them in their life.
Yeah.
And you can be a very small part in that and have helped them, and that's very, very rewarding.
Yeah, I imagine that's particularly rewarding when, I suppose, at the start of the process, if the client feels that it's pretty much a lost cause, even if they know they're in the right, they just feel maybe the evidence doesn't support that, and so that must be particularly rewarding when they've seen that process and you've actually helped them through that process and actually come to a conclusion that has been positive for them, when they've probably been in a place of almost despair from the start. I imagine that must be really quite satisfying.
Yeah, no, it is. Those are the best ones, where really the client might think we've got no hope because, I don't know, for example, we might be going up against a company. It could be employment law, and it's someone that's been unfairly dismissed, for example, and they think, well, it's little old me versus this big company. How am I ever going to win this? And then hopefully, touch wood, you do well for them and you win, and then it means a lot more when you're able to get that sort of result for someone where you might have had your backs up against the wall for whatever reason, because, as you say, you don't have the evidence, or you're against, it's the David versus Goliath. But 99 times out of 100, the British legal system will find the right result, and you can lean on that and you can rely on that, and it does make it a lot easier when you get good results.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Okay, so I was going to say, thinking back to when you started out, but obviously times have changed. And I'm not saying that you're old or anything like that, but even in the last couple of years, things have changed with the qualification routes changing and things like that. So, looking at how things are now, what sort of advice would you give to people who are new to the industry, just starting out, maybe starting to have a few questions or a few moments of anxiety of whether they've made the right career choice? What advice would you give to people in that situation?
I've probably got a few bits of advice, really. I mean, where you said anxiety about whether or not they've picked the right thing, I had that. Even though I've been in a legal family for my entire life, I've still got a couple of years into my career and thought, you know what? And it may have been off the back of a bad result. And I suppose that's probably where the advice is. Don't let a bad day think you've picked a bad career, or make you think you've picked a bad career. Everyone gets imposter syndrome, I think. Probably even you, Mike, have had imposter syndrome at some point, and it's a fact of it. But I think if you've got imposter syndrome, it's probably a privilege to have imposter syndrome, because it means you are achieving. It means you are somewhere that you wanted to be, and the fact that you possibly don't think you're worthy of it, everyone gets that, even the people who might seem the most confident. So advice number one is don't let one bad result or one bad day or week influence you and make you think you've picked the wrong career. Obviously, some people have picked the wrong career, and I get that completely. I think we touched on it earlier, having a release, having something that you love that can be your complete time away from the job, whether it be football, any sort of sport, or arts and craft, whatever, having something where you can completely decompress and not think about the work, and that will stop you thinking about the work, because often if you're sitting watching telly, your mind will wander to that thing you did at work today. But having something that's your complete release and relax is very important. And probably being a sponge, listening as much as possible. I think it's very easy when you're junior to think you can run before you can walk, and think, yeah, I've got this. But actually, and this would have been advice to myself, I think possibly I was guilty of thinking I could run before I could walk at times, but just sitting back and listening. And I don't necessarily mean listening when you're being talked at, but I was lucky to do some of my earlier parts of my career in open offices, and just hearing another person on the phone and observing styles and the way they would talk to clients or solicitors on the other side of a matter. It's all everyday stuff, but it can help you to sort of build what you think can be your style, or what your style can be. And I found that quite helpful. Working in an open plan office to start with, I felt a bit like I couldn't focus, but actually there's so many different people in different stages in their career, of different levels of experience, that if you absorb it all, it's only going to help you. So yeah, listen as much as possible.
Yeah. And just to add to that, kind of listening is really important. And one of the things I was told early in my career is kind of you'll meet many people throughout your life and your career. And the key to being successful is taking the bits that you like from them and use them, in your own style, and ignoring the bits you don't like, because there'll always be bits that there's always positives and negatives to everyone and the way that they work. And if you can use it to your advantage and take the bits that you like and really kind of run with them, then it'll kind of, you'll do okay. But that sounds as if similar sort of thing to what you're saying there. Yeah, I think listening is hugely important. And like you say, it's not just listening because you have to, it's listening because that's what's going to help you improve and adapt.
Yeah, you sort of learn by osmosis, really, don't you? You might not even realize that you're learning, or even that you're listening, but your ears prick up when someone's on the phone or when someone's dictating or something like that. And you never know what nuggets you can grab and run with as part of how you form yourself as a lawyer. Yeah, absolutely. And kind of what you were saying about imposter syndrome as well. One of the things I think about imposter syndrome, which, if I'm honest with you, I didn't really know the term is a fairly recent term, but I think it's something that even back in my parents' day probably still existed as well, but it's just become more recognized, isn't it? But I think the other thing I think with imposter syndrome is it also shows that you care, because you're showing that you have that humility to basically say, look, I'm doing all right with this, but am I doing as well as I could be? And therefore you're showing that you still have that kind of openness to improve and learn and get better at what you're doing. So I think some people see it as, I shouldn't really be in this room, I'm not good enough to be here. Whereas actually it's kind of like, well, this is a good opportunity to learn and improve yourself and get to the standard where maybe you think other people are, but they're probably feeling the same sort of way about you. Sorry, not about you, about themselves. Yeah. At some stage, maybe not necessarily at this moment in time, but at some stage they would have felt the same way or still do. Exactly, brilliant. Yeah. No, that's really, really good advice. And we do speak to a lot of people who are quite new in their careers, or even, I've got a very good friend who's a partner at a Southampton-based firm, and he said one of the challenges they have with newly qualified is that they just go into complete panic at times, and you see exceptional people just have to be signed off for weeks at a time because they've just completely gone into a mental panic. So it's good to know that others have been in that situation and that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and there's also the support. There's people there to fall back on, talk to, and who are prepared to support you. Yeah, you'll always find someone to talk to. And I've been lucky enough to be involved in a lot of the recruitment we've been doing over the last couple of years. And a phrase which has become our sort of buzz phrase recently is attitude over aptitude. So we would far rather have someone who is very self-aware, very keen to learn, great attitude, always listening, all of those really good attributes, but perhaps isn't necessarily a straight A student, but can be taught and can learn and can grow, rather than someone come in who is straight A student, but actually their attitude stinks, and they know they're a straight A student, and they don't think they need to learn despite being wet behind the ears. So I think you spot on with that. It's a lot about your attitude and how you can fit in.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tom, thanks very much. I think there's some great advice in there. It was really interesting to hear your story, and it's quite interesting to hear the fact that obviously that although you have come from you followed in your parents' footsteps, if you like, in many ways, you've also forged a route for yourself and become your own person, but also still felt the kind of, if you like, challenges, or as we use the word anxiety about whether it's right for you or not, and had that kind of self-doubt. So even with somebody like yourself who's probably had quite a clear route in, there's still those challenges to overcome, which I think will be really useful for some people to hear when they maybe have got more difficulties to overcome. How can people get hold of you? Should they wish to either engage with you or use your services? What's the best way for them to do so?
Well, I've got LinkedIn, Tom Oliver on LinkedIn. We've got our website, glanvilles.co.uk. I am on there on the people page. Alternatively, I can read out my email address now if that would help. If anyone needs a litigator, or even if you don't, I can point you in the direction of the right person at the firm. But email's tom.oliver@glanvilles.co.uk, and always happy to help.
Excellent. Well, Tom, it's been great having you on the podcast. I appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Cheers, Mike.